Welcome back to Forbidden Knowledge News. I'm your host, Chris Matthew. Today my guest is Preston Dennett. Before I bring him on, a couple of announcements. You can always get new episodes free on Rokfin, Odysee, and all podcast platforms. Rokfin is where you get our premium content. You get our regular shows and all the amazing content from every creator on Rokfin. And definitely check out the podcasts that we feature on the Forbidden Knowledge Network. You get those all on our website, forbiddenknowledge.news. And follow us on Facebook. Those links are all in the description. And guys, what does Big Pharma fear most? It's you being healthy and not part of the perpetual cycle of being poisoned by Big Pharma and our medical industry. Break yourself free and check out what may be the most powerful antioxidant known to man. C60 Purple Power is amazing. The benefits have been personally outstanding. But do your own research. Click the link in the description and check out their website. If you order from that link, you can get 10% off plus free shipping. What is your health worth to you? Today I want to welcome back to the show Preston Dennett. He began investigating UFOs and the paranormal in 1986 when he discovered that his family, friends, and coworkers were having dramatic, unexplained encounters. Since then, he has interviewed hundreds of witnesses and investigated a wide variety of paranormal phenomena. He is a field investigator for the Mutual UFO Network, ghost hunter, paranormal researcher, and author of 26 books and more than 100 articles on UFOs and the paranormal. He has also taught classes on various paranormal subjects and lectures across the United States. Preston, welcome back. How you doing?
I'm doing good. Yeah, pretty good. How are you?
I'm great. It's great to have you back on. And it was really fun meeting you last year at the UFO Mega Conference. You had a wonderful presentation. I really enjoyed it. And man, you do fantastic research. I really love your YouTube channel where you've been breaking down these cases you've been researching. I highly recommend everyone subscribe to Preston's channel. The link is going to be right there in the description. But I want to discuss a lot of these cases you've been covering tonight because it's really fascinating stuff. And it's been a while since you've been on. If you could, for those that aren't familiar with you, remind the audience how you really got involved with the paranormal and this UFO research.
Well, not voluntarily. Wasn't looking for this. Hated the subject of UFOs and paranormal, but found out my brother had seen a UFO after a report came on the news about a sighting over Alaska. And it interested me just barely enough to ask my brother about his claim of having seen a UFO some years earlier. And I was finally willing to listen, because back then I wasn't. This is 1986 when this all went down. And he described an amazing sighting. And it kind of knocked me over. And started asking other people. Found out my sister-in-law had had a sighting and face-to-face encounter with grays. My other sister-in-law had had encounters as a little girl with blue beings. And it just kind of snowballed from there. I mean, that was it in terms of family members, but I had like 3 or 4 friends who had encounters, one who had missing time, brought it up at work. Some people there had had some really amazing encounters, including missing time. A lady's daughter had encounters with grays, being taken on board, fully conscious. So it hit home for me, and that got me checking out books. I was going to disprove them, was not able to. So I ended up joining MUFON, Mutual UFO Network, became a field investigator, started doing formal interviews, and one thing led to another, started writing articles. After about 10 years of being in the field, put out my first book and haven't looked back since.
That's awesome. And I don't see how people who have had their own experiences can hold this stuff in. Like I hear stories all the time of, I saw this amazing, UFO experience, or I've been abducted, but, I had to go back to normal life and I just hid it away. I didn't want everybody to think I was crazy. But I find more and more people that have done that in the past are coming out now because it seems to be a little bit more acceptable in the mainstream. Are you finding the same thing?
Yeah, definitely. The tide has turned quite a bit. Back then, there was a lot more skepticism and ridicule and debunking. disbelief. And I remember, being mad at my friends, my family and coworkers, like, why didn't you tell me? And they said, are you kidding? You would not have believed me, would you? And I'm like, well, I guess you're right.
Oh yeah, for
So,
sure. It's
but
definitely an interesting time we live in. And I know you've covered so many cases, so this is going to be a kind of big question for you. But what are some of your favorite cases, whether they're recent or something classic in the past? What are maybe a couple that really stick out for you?
there's several, and I get asked this question a lot. So I'll pick a different one because I mean, it's so hard to pick. It
Yeah.
really is. But one that really does stand out for me, which I just find fascinating, was this lady, a housewife from Nebraska, who contacted me after hearing me on the radio. She wanted to know if I'd ever heard of anyone seeing an ET like the one she saw. And after she told me her story, I had to say, no, I really haven't. And what happened to her was, it's a fairly long story. I'll shorten it a little bit. She had been having encounters her whole life. As a little girl, she would have these 3 foot tall teddy bears coming into her room and realized they were grays at some point because that screen memory sort of shattered. And these encounters continued up through adulthood. And she had a baby. And following the birth of her baby, she started to get really ill with something akin to hypoglycemia. I mean, she went to the doctor because she was passing out after eating, and her blood sugar was just all over the charts. And she does have diabetes in her family. She thought maybe that was it, but the doctor said, no, we don't know what's going on with you. They were prescribing vitamins. She had gained some weight, from her pregnancy and was losing it rapidly. And she started to get dangerously thin. She had to carry around a peanut butter sandwich and juice wherever she went to stabilize her blood sugar. And it was just having a real hard time with it. And she said she was passing out 3-5 times a day. And one evening, she got up in the middle of the night to get some juice. And she's walking towards the kitchen, and boom, she's not in her kitchen anymore. She's still fully conscious, but feeling somewhat sedated. And she's in this large auditorium, is how she described it, lying on a table in a cubicle. And it was very disorienting for her. So she's looking around. It's a huge, huge area, a curved ceiling, indirect lighting, but cubicles like in an office. And she's lying on like a doctor's table. And there's a doorway or an opening in this cubicle. And she looks across the hallway. And there's another man lying on a table. He's wearing a red plaid shirt. And he's also like out of it, dazed. She looks at the ground, the floor rather, and it's industrial carpet. So she's like, where the heck am I? And she looks at that man. And he's like, and she's like, hey, hi. He's like, hey, hi, where are we? And she's like, I don't know. She's like, what's your name? He says, my name is Cooper. That was his real name. I did not use her real name because she doesn't want that to be revealed. And they're trying to orient themselves when she sees someone walking down the hallway. And there's a few figures, but she only notices one because he's about 9, maybe 10 feet tall. Huge. And he's wearing a black kind of jumpsuit with a cape. And he's not human. I mean, he's humanoid, but his face is so large. He's got these giant eyes, which are kind of Asian looking, and really big jutting chin, a super high forehead. And she says it wasn't hair that was on his head. It was more like straw, orange straw sticking up about 3 inches. And she says this guy comes right to her and says, hi, Jill, it's your turn. That's not her real name. And that set her off. She started screaming as he took this cape, or what she perceived to be the cape, and wrapped it around her body so she couldn't move, put these silver bell-like instruments on her body in various places on her torso, and they started pulsing energy, and she's screaming bloody murder. She's just out of her mind with fear. And next thing she knows, she's back in her living room and standing up, screaming, hyperventilating. She runs over to her husband and tries to wake him up. He won't wake up, cannot wake him up. She tries for 5-10 minutes, goes to her children, and they will not wake up. So she spent the next 20 minutes, half an hour, trying to wake up her family. And finally, her husband wakes up. He's very groggy. And he's like, "What's going on? What's the matter?" And she's like, "Oh my God, this happened. This happened to me." And, God bless him. He was supportive and, believed her, because, a lot of family members have trouble with this. And this splits apart families. But what was really interesting about this whole case was she was sore. Her body, she said, was physically sore for about a week or two. And it wasn't until the next day that she realized how good she was feeling. She's like, she didn't pass out once, not once. And didn't the next day or the next after that, she started gaining weight. Her weight stabilized. It's like, "Preston, they healed me. Why would they heal me?" And I asked her, "I don't, tell me about your life. Do you have any, what does your husband do?" He's a mechanic, I think it was. And there's no military in her family. There's nothing. She's not influential, neither in terms of, social work or anything. I don't know. It's very bizarre, but a very interesting case. And just one end note real quick. It's just as, I don't know if this is significant or not, but before this all happened, she had been vacuuming and she sneezed and she felt something in her nose and she pulled it out, and it was this metallic cylinder little thing. And she freaked out and quickly threw it away, which she now regrets. Obviously, because she did go to the doctor, and there was a metallic thing in her lung, some sort of weird foreign body that looked kind of like a key ring, a metal ring, and they could not explain that at all.
Wow. So, is she getting any further tests done about that particular, object?
Yeah. I'm not in terms of like getting it removed or anything, but she goes back yearly, and there's no foreign body reaction. The doctor says, "Let's just watch it." This is to do surgery on this would be major, life-threatening surgery. So let's just watch it. And it's, as far as I know, it's still there. I haven't contacted her in a couple of years. Healing is definitely a major part of all of this. It's often overlooked or pushed to the fringe or not discussed. And I got a healing case very early on in my research. And it turned out to be the first book I ever wrote was UFO Healings, which had 100 cases. I ended up reissuing it with, 3 times the amount, 300 cases. It's a major part of this, and really, I think, made me begin to turn around and take a second look at, is this what is going on with people who are being taken on board? Because there's a lot of fear surrounding it, and people are like, I didn't ask for this. This is involuntary. They're experimenting on me, and I think this shows a really benevolent side to this that is not fully understood for sure, but definitely they are healing people who are contactees particular.
Yeah, speaking of making this phenomena something hard to understand is the aspect of whether it's physical or not. Now, this one that you were just talking about, did you get the sense that she believed that she was in a physical state as this was occurring?
Yeah. And the reason I would say that that's the case is because she was in fact awake, walking across the room when it happened. And there are a lot of people who will, wake up, they'll go to bed and boom, they're on board a UFO. Or they'll wake up and see grays surrounding their bed, and people think, this is sleep paralysis. This is a lucid dream, not about experience. And I just don't think the evidence supports that. I really don't. A good portion, I would say most people who have this experience do have some sort of medical effect to it. They'll wake up feeling groggy or drugged even. They'll have body marks, scoop marks, bruises. They'll go to the doctor and the doctor's like, well, what's this in your sinus? Looks
Yeah.
like you've had surgery. What's this? She had that. And there are a good portion of cases where people are not in their bedroom when they should be, or wherever they were. A great case, this guy interviewed in Louisiana had that. He was supposed to do chores one morning, 7 a.m. He's there with his little brother sitting on the hay bale wagon, and his stepdad is in the house, and they're about to do their morning chore of baling hay. And Tim is his name. He turns to his little brother and says, "You forgot your gloves. Go in the house, get your gloves." They know exactly what time it is. It's 7 a.m. His little brother runs into the house. Next thing Tim knows, his little brother is coming out with his gloves on, and his stepdad, is really angry. He said, "Tim, where the heck have you been? Where were you?" And Tim's like, "What do you mean? I've been sitting here the whole time." And he says, "No, you ain't. This is in Louisiana. You've not. And we've been searching for you for the last hour." And he's like, "No, I'm sitting right here the whole time." So this caused a huge argument. He was missing for an hour. So where was he? No, this is not psychological. He was somewhere physically.
Yeah, man, that is so crazy. And do you find that most of the encounters or abductions or missing time or anything that you're dealing with is more of a physical than maybe people experiencing this in their sleep or after they've gone to sleep or things of that nature?
Yeah, I would say it's every time I get a case, that's one of the things I kind of consider. And I have no cases really where someone's like being taken on board and someone's next to them and like, "No, you're not on. I was here the whole time watching you." No. As near as I can tell, this is entirely physical.
Wow.
I'm not going to say I shouldn't say it's entirely physical because I don't know for sure. There are people who, do have dream-like encounters. And it's one of the questions I ask. I mean, there's a whole list of questions. And if you are having like major UFO dreams, this is a huge red flag.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, as near as I can tell, this is physical, which makes sense because let's face it, if sleep paralysis does not leave landing trace marks in your backyard, and it does not cause implants to appear in your body, you cannot photograph a sleep paralysis event. And these UFOs are appearing on radar. As near as I can tell, this is a logical extension of a sighting, of a landing, being taken on board. These are craft piloted by ETs. There's a lot of resistance to the idea of extraterrestrials for whatever reason. Mm-hmm. We're very anthropocentric. We're very we're the center of the universe. No, we're not. We're just one planet out of an infinite number of them. And I think this is part of the result of this vicious cover-up. This ruthless clampdown on UFO information has led people to sort of look at this subject as being perhaps psychological. And I don't think it is.
No, yeah, I think you're right, and I think that there's so many different types of entities and beings, and the way they interact with us is completely different at times, and sometimes completely personal, depending on who they're interacting with. So it's a very interesting phenomenon. And like I said earlier, I was looking at a lot of the videos on your YouTube channel. You've been doing some great work, and I wanted to maybe go over a few of these that they're all very interesting, but some that really stand out for me. And the first one I'm looking at here is the flying saucer and the Atlantean bracelet. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about that video.
Yeah, this is comes from a gentleman by the name of James Santiago, who I met at a dinner party. And found out I was a researcher and says, "Boy, do I have a story for you." And boy, did he. Oh my God, I've never heard anything like this. And I mean, there is a high strangeness factor to UFO encounters. And his one was definitely on the extreme end. Uh, and it's funny because after doing a long, extensive interview, he really had no idea he was a contactee. I mean, he just didn't put all the dots together. And I kind of helped him out with that through extensive questioning. But his main encounter that really woke him up was really interesting. He was a nightclub singer back in the 80s, I believe it was, very successful, quite wealthy, and was doing a show in Calgary, I think it was Calgary in Canada, and had another booking in Vancouver. So he normally flies to each of his locations, but had the opportunity to drive with the mother of his makeup artist. And his makeup artist, who I call Melanie, said, "Just warning you, my mother's a little bit eccentric. She's a very famous artist. She lives out of her car. She's weird. I'm warning you." And James is like, "Oh, that's fine. He's an artist too. I've seen his work. It's amazing." And he saw, I call her the artist Cleo. That's not her real name, but I know who she is. And she is very famous. I mean, she's got paintings in museums and institutions across the US and the world. And this lady's a big deal. So Jane, she's like, "I'm going to Vancouver. Drive with me." And James is like, "No, I'm not doing that." Because she was really eccentric. I mean, she's super psychic. She wore makeup with dark circles around her eyes and was an extreme vegetarian and had 100 little idiosyncrasies. But they just hit it off. And he's like, "Fine, I'll do it." And immediately regretted it because about 25 miles out, they had just left. She turns to him and says, "Do you have any change in the car?" And he's like, "What?" She says, "Do you have any quarters or nickels?" And he's like, "Well, yeah, I have a box of change in the back." She says, "Would you mind if we got rid of them?" And he's like, "Okay, why?" And she says, "Well, I think you should know I'm being followed by UFOs, and they track me using copper." And he's like, "What?" Thinking, "Oh no, this crazy lady, what have I done?" He's like, "Fine," and they stop the car, and he's not going to fish out all the quarters and nickels. He just gives a box of change away to some kid on the street. His lucky day. Wow. And he's like, "Really, copper? Isn't there copper in the car?" And she's like, "Well, no, I had all the copper taken out and replaced with silver." So he's like, "Wow, this is a Monte Carlo, big American Land Cruiser is how he called it." So he's like, "Oh no, I'm in the middle of, and they started driving through the Rocky Mountains, and that freaked him out because he had never even realized how big the Canadian Rockies are. And of course, they are huge." Yeah. And so they're driving along, and he says it was actually a great day because she was very spiritual, and she started talking to him about all these amazing subjects, like Atlantis, like all kinds of really deep spiritual subjects, and just opened up his mind and sent him on this pure spiritual path of discovery. So it was really a really wonderful experience for him meeting Cleo. And they're in the middle, they stop for dinner. These two weird guys sitting next to the table are staring at them. You thought that was weird, and you thought that, I don't know if that's significant, but I'm including it because it's something I noticed. These guys were staring at us. And so they continue their journey, and they're going through the Rockies. Now they're in the heart of the Rockies. It's I think it's like 9 or 10 p.m. And Cleo turns to him and says, "Do you feel it? Do you feel the pressure?" And James says, "No. What are you talking about?" And she says, "We're about to see a UFO. Don't you feel the pressure?" And after a few minutes, he did. And I asked him about it because this really intrigued me. I've had other witnesses describe this. This is kind of how they will paralyze people. And I'm not sure if this is technology or if they're doing this through, the mind or whatever. But he started to feel this pressure. He said it was across his entire body. It pressed him into the seat. It wasn't uncomfortable or painful, but it started to get alarming because it started to feel really intense. Like he said, it was like being underwater almost. And Cleo's getting really nervous. And suddenly, without any warning, boom, this object is over their car. And he said it was a flying saucer, a big circular disc. And it was a brilliant turquoise green, super bright. There's no lights in the Canadian Rockies, of course. So it was just the headlights in front of them and this green disc about 50 feet over their car, tracking them. I mean, right smack on the car, or above it, rather. And Cleo presses the accelerator to the floor, he said, and starts screeching around the corners. And there are chasms, gorges going hundreds of feet down, thousands. This is a little guardrail.
Yeah.
So he's freaking out a little bit. She's freaking out. But he's absolutely entranced by this object and can feel like good vibrations from it. I mean, he had no fear of it and just really like wanted to stop and knock on the door and go inside. And he was excited. And he said there was another weird thing. And this also really piqued my interest because he said, I don't know how to describe this, but I felt more aware than I have ever felt in my life, more awake, more conscious. It's almost like being enlightened. And I instantly started thinking of all these other cases where people, said the same exact thing and literally became smarter, or what do you call it? Their IQ went up following an experience. They rose to the top of their class. They felt super, super awake. And he's describing the same thing. I mean, it changed him, his consciousness. It raised his consciousness. And so he's like, this is amazing. And it stayed there for at least 10 minutes. And, I asked him about this. I'm like, were there any other cars? And he's like, not that I remember. And I'm like, did you feel any shift in consciousness? Or, did you have a continuous awareness here? Because I'm, fishing for any clues of missing time. Because when something is that close, and it's chasing your car, that's usually an abduction, an onboard experience. I suspect that may have happened, honestly. But he could not point to anything directly other than finally this object flits away and she starts slowing down a little bit. And he's like, oh my God. Oh, wait, I'm skipping a part. Most interesting part. She says, this object is right over the car, right? And she says, open the glove compartment and pull everything out. And he's like, what? Why? She says, just pull out everything. And there's a compartment. I want you, press a button on the bottom of the glove compartment and a latch will open. I want you to pull out what's in there. And he's like, oh, okay. So he does. He pulls out the maps and sunglasses and the pens and so forth and fishes in the bottom of this glove compartment, which is quite large. It's down to his elbow, and he's fishing for this button, finds it and presses it, and it snaps open and hits his hand, pulls it out. He's like, ow. And she's like, pull out the object that's in the compartment now, quick. And so he reaches in and feels something heavy in there. It's wrapped in cloth. He pulls it out, and it's wrapped in what appears to be purple velvet. And she's like, unwrap it and put it between us. And he unwraps it, holds it up, and it's this giant gold bracelet with about, I think he said 7 seafoam green stones inset around the circumference. And massive. It's a massive, very heavy gold bracelet. Absolutely beautiful, filigreed, just this work of art. And his eyes are like, oh my God, looking at this thing. because he said a woman could not have worn this. This had to be for a giant. It was, I mean, it's not your average bracelet, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
So she's like, put it between us, put it between us. And he does. And they both put their hands through it. It's big enough for them both to put their hands inside it. She's like, rub it. And he's like, rub it? And she's like, yes, rub it with your fingers. And so they did. And they're rubbing this bracelet. He said it was almost radiating energy. And so they're rubbing it, and this appeared to cause this craft that was following their car to lift up and dart away. And she says, they held this bracelet for a few more moments, and she said, okay, you can put it back now. And so he lifts it up and says, wait a second, what the heck is this? And she says, well, this is from Atlantis. He's like, what are you talking about? So when I was a young woman, I was diving off the coast of Spain, and I heard a voice in my head, and it led me to this. And it was in a small little cave underwater off the coast of Spain. And she pulled it out. And apparently she said it was from Atlantis. So they had been talking about Atlantis the whole way there. And she says a lot of people living today are reincarnated from Atlantis times and are coming back to sort of fix the mistakes that led to the destruction of Atlantis. And we're on the same path now in our society, self-destruction. So that was kind of interesting. And I mean, she had a lot of stories, a lot of really interesting stories.
Yeah,
that kind of relate to this.
That sounds very interesting. Now I want to kind of break down a couple of things about that. First, you said that the UFO, the presence of it, made him feel kind of excited and enlightened, and I find it very interesting that after so many encounters like this, people not only become more enlightened in some ways, but they seek more spirituality. They seek to make themselves better, and I find this in most of the UFO or ET encounter cases. That people seem to want to find something better in their life or do better for their life. Is that something you found as well?
Yes. Thanks, Chris, because it frustrates me how there's not enough focus on the spiritual aspect of UFO encounters. And this is another reason why I'm taking a second look at this, thinking, this is a really good thing for people. And that is a general rule. I would say that happens more often than not. It's almost like a near-death experience, which has the same effect on people, by the way. They come back and they start having precognition or doing mediumship or out-of-body experiences and past life recall. And it's the same darn thing when someone has a really close encounter, particularly an onboard experience. But sometimes just the presence of a UFO will do it. And that was absolutely true in James's case. And it just transformed his life. He ended up getting very interested in Saint Germain and ancient occult wisdom.
Wow.
And he was already a really spiritual guy.
Yeah.
An artist, I mean. But this really just opened him up and just sent him on a pathway of. And he ended up having some very highly mystical experiences, which he wouldn't let me write about because they were very personal. He's since passed away, and I'm I'm itching to talk about it, but I have to kind of respect his wishes. Right. But I will say, his experiences were beyond, ghosts and precognition and things like this. I mean, he met some spiritual masters, I guess I would put it. Is how far I'm willing to go with that.
Right. Man,
but
that
yeah,
is so interesting.
Really woke him up. Yeah.
That's cool. Now, with this encounter, you said that they held up this bracelet and the UFO kind of darted off. Do you think that it was because she thought this UFO maybe had malevolent intentions and she wanted it to leave? What do you think was going on there?
Well, apparently she did have some fear issues. She was a contactee. He found this out, that she was on the run from the government, Canadian government and the US government, who were tracking her. And she would live in a hotel for 2-3 days and move on, and had a lifetime of experiences. They saw UFOs twice on the same road trip. Following that incident, UFOs landed on a peak right next to them, and was looking at them like, look, and she did not want to look. And I think that's probably when they were taken on board, because if you're driving by a landed UFO, that's another. And they ended up seeing UFOs. She's like, look at that star. They were pulling into Vancouver, and he's like, right, Cleo, that's a star. We saw a UFO, but that is a star. And she's like, no, it's not. Keep your eye on it. And sure enough, it darts away suddenly, drops down and darts. And he's like, oh my God, I'm sorry. Yeah, she did have fear issues with it for whatever reason. I think she was a contactee. Would have loved to interview her.
Well, whenever you bring in the government, she says she's being tracked by the government. It seems like that's when the kind of malevolence comes into this whole phenomenon, is when you mention the human aspect or the black projects aspect, or, anything that's having to do with our technology that we may have reverse engineered. That's when things seem to get a little dark, right?
Yeah. Many contactees tell me that they're fine with their encounters. It sometimes does start out very scary, but people who are progress with it usually, and I'll underline that, usually come away from it feeling like this is good for them and it was a positive experience and they've learned a lot from it and they wouldn't trade it for anything. And that the worst part of it is, being tracked by the government or threatened. And I know contactees who have been taken on board, and the next thing they know, government shows up and it's questioning them all about it and tracking them and surveilling them. I know contactees who are constantly under surveillance, and I've had people say, people broke into my house, they stole my hypnosis tapes. That happened to one lady I interviewed. Oh, wow. Another guy from upstate New York was having all these encounters, which he didn't really like. It was missing time. It was very traumatic for him. He was having PTSD and nightmares, even though he did come away from it spiritually transformed. He says, oh yeah, I can give psychic readings. It's really strange. I just look at a person and he hears a voice, you have a job to do, and starts giving them information. And he's gotten testimonials back from these people, like, you were right. But he wrote down all his experiences, put it in an envelope, put it on his mantle. So when broke into his house, took only that, just that, not any of his valuables. He called the police. They're like, we're sorry, they took an envelope. We can't really pursue that. He's like, well, it was valuable to me, and so he didn't get much help from authorities. But someone broke into his house and stole. I mean, come on, what is going on here? And I've had problems myself with, phone and email and, physical mail. And once I did receive a threatening phone call from some guy who claimed to be in government, I don't know.
Wow. Man. Yeah, it seems that once you get too close to anything, they sure don't like that. And oddly enough, it's heavily into this topic that gets involved. Before we move on from that, have you ever had any or covered any Men in Black encounters or recent Men in Black encounters? Because I haven't heard of many lately.
I've only gotten very, very, very few. I'm certainly aware of it. And I know, I've read many cases. The only one that I ever really got, which was at all substantial, by Men in Black, I don't mean like government people. I mean, there's people say, I'm Men in Black, and these are government. No, I think there's sort of a misconception, I guess you might say, because there are government surveillance, and that's not the real Men in Black.
Right.
The Men in Black are these largely human-looking figures which show up in a black Cadillac, and they walk funny, they look funny, they don't speak English quite right, they're very pale, and they are there to threaten you or take away any physical evidence. And the only case I got involved this gentleman who, as a kid, was having all kinds of, well, throughout his life, he's in his 70s now, but he was approached by, I mean, he saw this black Cadillac come up, and these men in black came out and threatened him. And only later did he realize there was no way a car could have driven up along this ledge, sort of this ledge along this river gulch, cemented, sort of a cemented river. There just wasn't enough room for a black Cadillac, but that's what he remembers them driving up in and coming up to him and threatening him. And he doesn't remember exactly what happened. They told him not to talk about it, if I recall correctly. And so that's the only one that I really have. But I wonder about those men in black, because I know of many cases where they show up and take away people's evidence, and they should not even be able to know about it. I mean, there's one case that, one case real quick comes to mind where this guy was given a piece of metal by the ETs, and he was grabbed it. It appeared on his dresser. They promised him this. They said, "Well, it will appear." He had been taken on board. They showed it to him, and they said, "We're going to give this to you as a gift for being part of our project, and you'll know it when you see it." And he wakes up one day, and there it is. He's like, "Wow, this is a guy from Texas." And he picks it up and grabs some of his notes and drives directly to, didn't make any calls or anything, drives directly to his therapist, Constance Clear, who is a UFO researcher. She passed away quite young. And on the way there, he was run off the road by the men in black, who took his notes, threatened him not to talk, took the bar of metal. He's like, "You have no right. I'm a U.S. citizen." And they said, "Go ahead, call the police." And took it. So these men in black, I don't know how they figured that out. They must be watching things very closely.
Yeah, that's so interesting, and you don't hear many recent encounters. I've heard a couple of more modern encounters, but that is very interesting. I want to go back to some of your videos here. You have one that I'd love to hear about: how to fly a UFO, an incredible account of UFO. This one is very, because I've heard of many people having these kind of encounters where they're being taught how to fly a UFO, like psychically with their consciousness or with their mind. So tell us about this one.
Yeah, I actually did mention Tim from Louisiana earlier. That's the guy who had missing time while doing hay baling. And he had similar incidents. That occurred when he was like 16 years old. And there was a big wave of incidents around that age. One time he woke up, found himself outside his house, and it's pouring rain, and he felt like someone was looking at him. He's very disoriented, and he's looking around, and he discovers that he's in the cattle fenced area, and his footprints, there's no footprints around him. It's raining. And so he quickly walks out, and he's making footprints. So that freaked him out. He had been clearly dropped from above outside his house, and had to break into the house, by the way, to get back inside. And had another incident where he was with his siblings. He had 3 siblings and a friend, and they're just listening to a top 50 countdown on the radio. It's a bright sunny day, and suddenly this ball of light comes into the living room and explodes. And everyone saw it. They all freaked out, and they ran outside thinking, that lightning had struck the power pole or something. But it turned out it was a bright sunny day. That made no sense. And he started to remember a different version of events. He said what actually happened was they're all dancing to the top, the music, and suddenly everyone froze, and we're not moving. And he's looking around at them like, what is going on? And then he sees this grays coming in through the wall and the window, 3 of them, and coming towards him, kind of pixelating and then reforming and coming towards him. And then this ball of light comes. So these are all these encounters you have. So just had all this missing time and didn't remember what was happening, but he started to remember. And he remembered being on board these craft when they're darting around in the sky like nobody's business, back and forth and up and down. And he remembered one of these incidents where he's standing in the control room of the craft, and there's two grays on either side in chairs flying the craft. And they're explaining to him exactly how they do it. And he had the distinct impression these were teenage grays who were learning how to fly the craft themselves, because they're like, well, let's try this, let's try that. Will that work? Oh, let's do that. And they were telling him exactly how they do it. And he says, honestly, I can't really remember what they were teaching me, but they were trying to teach me how to fly this craft. So that was basically what they were teaching him. And that's something I've heard from many contactees. And one more thing that was really interesting about his case, well, there's several interesting things, actually. He developed a real strong interest in physics, quantum physics, and magnetics. And he's got a high school education, but he says, all these concepts are coming in my mind, and I can look at stuff and know how it works. And he said, the weirdest thing is he has these memories of being on board a UFO. And when he's, they'll physically examine him sometimes. Once he jumped up, he broke free of paralysis and punched a gray right in the face. And he said it squashed in like a marshmallow. And a bunch of grays immediately tackled him. But another time he was put into what he calls the waiting room. And there's a bunch of other people there, humans, who are being taken. And they put you in this waiting room. And he says it's really fun because you can levitate at will. And everyone's just flying around, having a good time in this sort of waiting room. He's like, have you ever heard of this? I'm like, only I think I've heard it like one or two times. But after I put that story out, very, very strange, really nice guy. He's a security officer at a casino, I think, a police officer, a sports instructor. Really neat guy, and has had a lot of encounters with grays since then, where they show up in his room.
Now, with the grays, do you think that these are a mix of that they have some that are more biological and some maybe more like a biological android or robot or something? Because I've heard different accounts. I've heard that some have more emotions and interactions like humans, and some are more robotic. What do you think?
Yeah, I've talked to a lot of people about this, and some people do encounter grays that they feel have no emotions, and some are like, well, no, I felt incredible love from them, or even humor. And I'm sort of trying to patch this all together because each person's account is unique and individual, and yet they also have incredible similarities. And I'm talking to this lady in Florida now who's a full conscious contactee. And she helped clear it up a bit for me, because these short little grays, 3 foot tall, are the ones that are often described as being unemotional and very robotic, very lockstep, very almost hive-minded. And she, this lady Dolly is like, those are the AI. Those are biological androids. They do not have souls, or they're not incarnated like we would think of it. These can be turned on and off. And she says she's gone on board a UFO, and she's seen rooms where they're all just lined up like dummies. And this is exactly what Whitley Strieber said. He said they were stacked like cordwood, turned off. So I think this is where the confusion is. Yes, some of the grays are AI, artificial intelligence, androids, as we would think of it. But the 4 to 5 foot to 6 foot tall ones, skinny, willowy, with the huge almond eyes and large heads, are absolutely emotional. And what happens is some people are like, no, I don't think they were emotional. They don't, smile. They're not super facially expressive. And if someone is in a state of real fear, they interpret this as being bad for them, and they're not empathetic to the point where they can sense the Gray's emotions. And often what people say is they smiled at me with their eyes, or their emotions seem somewhat subtle or muted. But people who are like full on awake, that's when they start to really connect, I guess would be a good way of putting it, mentally or emotionally for that matter, and say, oh yeah, they were very emotional. And people describe the kind of love that they felt like getting married, falling in love for the first time, or holding their child for the first time, the kind of love that is unconditional. So there's definitely, I think, a misconception here. The Greys do have emotions, absolutely. But the AI, no, they don't.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I want to get to a couple more of your videos before we close out. One that looked really interesting to me was the smell of UFOs. And oddly enough, I've talked about this quite a bit, is people's smells that they get whenever they're having these UFO encounters. And some I've heard like rotten eggs, sulfur, and plenty of different things. So tell us about this.
Yeah, that's something that intrigued me after hearing Whitley Strieber talk about how he was taken on board and it smelled like a dirty locker room. And he smelled the eat. He's like, let me smell you, because he's screaming. And they're like, why are you screaming? And how can we stop you from screaming? He says, let me smell you. And he said they smelled kind of like cinnamon or burnt cardboard. And so that intrigued me, because I started thinking of other cases where, yes, someone else described the ETs is smelling very much like a biological being, a sort of a woodsy, damp odor. And I started going through all the cases I could find, and yeah, rotten eggs, a cheesy smell. One lady, she's like, they smelled like Frank and beans. I'm like, what? She's like, no, seriously, it smelled like beans.
Man, some of these guys smell delicious, apparently.
Smells like chicken. I actually did get a case like that. And then I got another case where the lady's like, well, it smelled like beans to me. I'm like, oh my God, that is really specific.
Yeah.
So there is definitely a distinct biological odor. Sulfur and eggs does come up sometimes, and often not pleasant smell, not always. But odors would fall into two main categories. And this really intrigued me, because the organic ones is a real pointer towards them being organic beings with a body odor, organic life, physical beings like us. But the other odor that was often described was a metallic odor, a chemical odor, odor like ozone, electrical smell. And that was present, not necessarily when people are taken on board, though it is, but even with just a UFO sighting, which points towards these being craft with a very powerful electrical energy source. So that points towards, again, the physicality of this experience.
What do you think about some of these beings being here but not physically, like being in a different spectrum to where they're physical beings but we can't perceive them because our vision is so limited? We can only perceive so much out of the spectrum of the universe, that these may exist just beyond that, but they're here on our planet at all times. What do you think about that not all of them, but maybe some of them?
Yeah, I think they do have that ability. I think these guys have mastered the ability of what we would think of as interdimensional travel. And we kind of know this because there are cases where people are seeing a UFO and people next to them aren't. And how would they do that? And it's not at all unusual when someone has a close encounter and next thing they know, they're having poltergeist-like activity, footsteps, doors opening, closing, lights turning on and off. And these beings can, these ships can cloak themselves. These beings can cloak themselves. And I think they have the ability to do that. And one lady I interviewed, the Greys told her flat out, we are not as physical as you are. And this is one of the reasons we're really interested in your genetics, because you guys are very much mired and attached to the third dimension, the physical plane. And we are more fourth dimensional. And we are trying to sort of reintroduce some of the physicality that we've lost due to genetic intervention, manipulation, and damage. So I think to some extent they do exist on a higher dimension, perhaps. It's really hard to pinpoint this and get the whole mechanism behind it, but it's pretty consistent. These stories, I think, are absolutely right. There is a higher dimensional aspect to this. I'm not going to say these are interdimensional beings any more than we are, because we are interdimensional. I mean, we can go out of our body and we'd live on the astral planes after we die. So there's an interdimensional aspect to all things, all entities. Just they've mastered it. They are very technologically advanced, very spiritually advanced, and when you are taken on board a UFO, it's very much like a near-death experience. I think, in essence, you are being pulled into a higher dimension sometimes. I don't know. Still trying to figure it out.
Oh,
There's
yeah, that's a deep one. And I've been discussing this with a few guests lately who've brought up the topic of the connection with paranormal activity and UFOs, and we got in a discussion a couple of times of paranormal activity that happens after a UFO encounter, that the possibility that whatever kind of energy or whatever this UFO is using to either come to our planet or manifest into our reality, that it's causing this residual activity. There's maybe some kind of electromagnetic activity or opening some kind of portal to where this other paranormal activity occurs in that same location. Is this something that you've kind of found in this realm as well?
Yeah, absolutely. That is a rule. And it freaks out a lot of contactees because they'll be taken on board, and next thing they know, they've got ghosts and weird creatures. Just weird stuff. This guy from England, who I call Gary, was being taken by the Greys, and following that, they were having ghostly encounters. He says he looks up on his wall, and there's this dragon-looking thing, a giant lizard that was 3 feet tall, crawling along his wall. That happened like 3 or 4 times. They'd wake up, all the burners on their stove were on. They had a ghost dog walking through their house, shadow beings, orbs. I think, still trying to figure this out, but I think you kind of hit it on the head. Either it raises a person's awareness and they're seeing stuff that's always been there, or it tears a hole in the dimensions, or the veil between the worlds, kind of, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And allows all this stuff to come flying through, or perhaps they themselves, their bioelectric field is raised to a certain extent. And I think that's true because following an encounter, people report problems with computers, electronic equipment, and all this, street lights going on and off under them. And so suddenly they're a bright light. And I think this can draw in spiritual entities from other dimensions, because mediums talk about this all the time. And the ghosts that contact them say that they can see a medium from the other side because they are emitting this really bright light that pierces through to the astral planes. So I think those are kind of my 3 theories here.
Wow, man. Yeah, that's so cool. And it could be kind of a mix of all 3. Who knows? That's very interesting. We got time for one more little brief synopsis of one of your videos. I'd like to get into alien symbols on the skin. This one's very interesting, and I haven't really heard too many accounts of having strange symbols besides maybe some triangles or the classic scoop marks of things of that nature. But what kind of symbols are you talking about here?
Yeah, this is not scoop marks that I'm talking about. And triangles, yeah, to some extent, but I think the triangle in some cases is akin to an inoculation or a mark from, surgery perhaps, or some procedure they're doing. No, I'm talking about something else here. There's a case, and the case that I had my own personal case, which got me diving deeper into this. And I found a bunch of these cases where these symbols of clearly intelligent design are being marked on people's bodies like tattoos. And this does not appear to be something that's, resulting from some procedure as an accidental side effect. This is a mark the ETs are putting on people's bodies like some sort of tattoo or tag or something. And I got a good dozen cases like this. There's one guy from, I think it was Brazil, somewhere in South America, who had this. And it was this circular mark with a cross in the center, very much like an astrological mark. And the ETs told him, this is our mark. And every time they took him on board, which was more than a dozen times, they would scratch it painfully on his skin somewhere. He had like all over his body at one point. It was on his arm, his shoulder, on his abdomen. And he got pictures of it. And the case for me that really got me into it, this was so bizarre. Real quick, this therapist that I met at a MUFON meeting in Burbank, we started talking. Turned out she was a contactee and had some UFO sightings. Didn't really realize she was a contactee until these symbols started appearing on her body. And they were very intelligent looking. And they looked like hieroglyphics. And after they appeared several times, she went to the library and checked out a book on symbols. And it wasn't Sanskrit. It wasn't hieroglyphs. It wasn't Arabic. It wasn't Japanese. But it was along those lines. And she copied them down. And this happened 10, 20 times. Finally just stopped. And one day she's watching TV with her boyfriend. And it turned out to be the program Intruders, the television miniseries based on Bud Hopkins' book, Intruders, where people are taken on board. And Bud Hopkins wanted it done accurately. It's really well done, actually. And there's an onboard segment where Ben Vereen, the actor, is being pulled on board and shown alien symbols. And Linda's mouth dropped, and her eyes go wide. And her boyfriend was also watching, turns to her and says, "Oh my God, Linda, look, honey, those are the symbols that appeared on your body." And she's like, "Yeah, I know. Oh my God." Wow. They were alien symbols. And then she started having all these dreams from childhood where she does remember being taken on board and seeing human look like ETs. So yeah, I don't know quite what to make of them. If you look on the internet, there's a bunch of these.
It's so strange when you look at stuff like that. You see that she's seen the same symbols from like a TV show, and the similarities between some UFO abductions and maybe accounts from something that the abductee had seen on TV like a few days before. It matches similarities. So there seems to be some kind of connection with human consciousness, and I'm wondering why they'd want to put symbols or markings on people, which just adds another layer of mystery to this whole thing,
Yeah, I got a couple of theories. One is it's for them. It's a tracking or a tagging or a marking saying, you are one of us type of things. This is what some have been told. Mm-hmm. But I'm also thinking in some of these cases, it's like a way of letting the person know that they've had contact, a calling card, sort of a clue to let them know. I don't know. It's weird. I mean, I can only speculate because we don't have a whole lot of firsthand information about why this is being done or what it means.
Yeah, but I mean, this is why I love the work that you're doing, because we're not going to get any kind of disclosure from our government. All the stuff that they put out there, they'll be like, "Oh, there's UFO, but it probably just swamp gas," and they'll reel it back, and we won't get any real answers from there. But it's the accounts from people who've had the experiences and people who have seen the UFOs, been on board, interacted with these beings. I think that's where the real truth and disclosure is going to come from, and the accounts that you're gathering and showing on YouTube. It's fantastic. So before you head out, let everybody know what's the best way they can find out more about your work. I'm going to have the link to your channel, website, social media, all that good stuff.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, I do have a website, prestondennett.weebly.com. All my books are there and excerpts. You can contact me through my website. My books are on Amazon. I'm on Facebook and Twitter, of course, YouTube, as you mentioned. So I've been studying this subject for 35 years now. Oof, most of my life. And I don't think it's ever going to stop. This is something that we're slowly escalating, I think. And at some point we will have disclosure. Probably not from the US government, but at some point, I mean, it's got to, I just cannot see this going backward.
Well, for us, for our community, it's already happened. For most of the people that look into this stuff seriously, they already know it's a real phenomenon. It's just, I guess people are waiting for some sort of confirmation, maybe from them. Maybe they'll tell us themselves, yeah, we're real. Who knows? That'd be great.
Yeah, we'll have open official contact.
Yeah.
I'm hoping for a mass sighting that pulls the word mystery out of the subject and puts it as fact. Because we know what it is. Come on. We're not alone in the universe. It's pretty simple. It's pretty obvious.
Yeah.
ETs are out there. It's very logical. We're not alone.
For sure, man, 100%. We definitely live in interesting times, and I'm interested to see how everything goes with everything that's gone with disclosure. But I don't have hopes from our government. I have hopes from people like yourself and people like us. So thanks again for coming. That was fantastic, and we'll definitely be talking again soon in the future.
Awesome. I look forward to it. Thanks.
Thank you. Until next time, everyone, have an excellent evening. We'll talk again tomorrow.